my family is coming to visit, we clean house. I scrub all the counters with extra vigor. I sort through my piles. I clear off the surfaces. We add a leaf to the dining room table and fresh placemats and napkins. I do it to make space for extra people, for their coffee mugs on the table, for their suitcase on the cedar chest, and their presents at dinner. Maybe you know what it's like to prepare for guests, and maybe you can empathize with the frenzy of activity in my household during the hours before our extended family arrives. It's the same kind of frenzy that's stirred up by Paul in his letter to the early Roman church. Hurry up, get ready. We can't afford to waste a minute, must not squander these precious daylight hours in frivolity and indulgence. Get out the vacuum. And I get it. Paul is excited and deeply worried that his people and us might miss the divine arrival, that we might get caught with dirty dishes in the sink and no special dessert to serve. And so like a kid on Christmas morning, Paul runs through the house, bouncing on the beds. Wake up, wake up. He is bursting with something like joy and with urgency. The coming that he anticipates, like the coming envisioned by the prophet Isaiah over 500 years earlier, will be a cosmos transforming event. So radical a shift that we and the earth's creatures and all of our stuff will be utterly changed. We won't need swords anymore, so they will be bent into iron plows to till the earth. No spears will be required, so we'll melt them into pruning hooks to tend the garden. There won't be war, so all the soldiers will retire and take up farming, or maybe carpentry, or culinary arts. Instead of gathering on the battlefield, we'll gather around those newly handcrafted tables to share the produce we've raised in mouth-watering meals we've prepared for each other. That is Isaiah's vision, or something like it. And it begins for us with the birth of a child who is somehow also the parent of the universe. This is one paradox among many this Advent season, and we don't need to get too literal about how it all works. The point is, we are being called to make space for the arrival of the divine, divine hope, divine joy, divine peace, divine love. In the words of that beloved hymn, Joy to the World, we are called to prepare him room. The question is, how? This year, I am making room to read, something I don't get to do often enough. But I recently picked up the Book of Joy as part of planning Advent worship, and it turns out the photo that's on the back cover of the book of Archbishop Desmond Tutu and His Holiness the Dalai Lama dancing together, that picture has been hanging in my office on my bulletin board for over a year. It's an image that long ago captivated me, so maybe this book has just been waiting for me to discover it and make room to read it. And I welcome this meditation on joy because I am trying to reconcile that joy-filled vision in Isaiah and all that excitement that Paul expressed with the world in which we are living during these final weeks of 2019. You see, joy is a tricky word for me. I am way too aware of all the ways that December can feel less than joyful. How we can be impatient with each other and more anxious about our to-do lists, have too many arguments in the checkout lines and fender benders on the highway. I am keenly aware that the glow of Christmas lights has a way of exposing our broken relationships or our absent loved ones. I'm aware that even as we light the tree at Macy's, entire communities struggle for lack of basic health care and well-resourced education. How the earth itself groans under the weight of consumer culture that makes space for more stuff by chucking last year's purchases in the basement or in the landfill. I chose this book about joy as my companion during Advent, not because I think we should all be happy at this time of year, but because I know that many of us are not. As Heather and I said when we first came across the book of joy, who couldn't use a little more joy this season? I wouldn't trust this topic to just anyone, certainly not to Hallmark movies or Christmas commercials, no matter what happy ending they promise. But I trust the Dalai Lama and Archbishop Desmond Tutu to share their wisdom about joy, because both have known deep pain and prolonged struggle. The Dalai Lama has been in exile from his home country for more than 50 years. And Archbishop Tutu has borne witness to the soul-crushing violence and bigotry in his home country. And yet, they chose to get together on the occasion of the Dalai Lama's 80th birthday to have and record an extended conversation about joy as a kind of birthday gift to the world. For a whole week, they drank tea together, teased each other, laughed often, reflected deeply, and so daily embodied their subject. They teach me that joy is not dependent on ideal circumstances, on having everything go well in our lives. This is what I'm interested in on this first Sunday of Advent, as we light the candle of hope. I'm interested in the kind of joy that is rooted in hope, the kind of joy we cultivate despite suffering, in the midst of struggle, apart from whether we feel happy all the time or not. Because there is so much heaviness in our lives, so much work to be taken seriously, so many news headlines one can only read with a furrowed brow and an aching heart. And I don't want to turn away from those headlines. They deserve our attention, because behind those headlines are people. God's beloved people, our siblings, co-created to share God's green earth. Also nature itself, with whom heaven sings at the promise of God's approach. The lives and teachings of Archbishop Tutu and Dalai Lama give me hope that we can do both: confront the suffering and live with joy. They contend that compassion, that focus on others, is indeed one of the keys that unlocks joy. Expanding our perspective is another. And so we prepare for Christ's arrival by making room for each other, inviting one another into conversation, into relationship, across religious, political, or personal divides, in hope that we might be surprised by what unfolds. Friends, I'm talking here about literal conversations. As when I turn to someone whose point of view I think I know, someone whose perspective I don't think I'm going to like, I start the conversation anyway, hopeful that I might learn something, that a relationship might take root. I live in that hope, which is less like wishful thinking and more like holding together the knowledge of the present moment with all its tangled tensions, with the assurance of God's activity in our midst. And so I say, I don't know what's going to unfold here, but I'm stepping out because I trust God is up to something. This is how we begin, by making space at our tables. The way the Dalai Lama made room for his friend Desmond Tutu, the way we make room for hundreds of guests here at Saugatuck Church during our annual Thanksgiving feast. The last time we hosted the feast 2 years ago, we seated everybody around our round tables. But Monique Bosch, this year's coordinator, proposed we do it differently this year. She suggested that we borrow tables from Christ and Holy Trinity, rectangular tables, and use them instead. The result was more seats, more room for more guests, and also more opportunities for those guests to introduce themselves to each other across the tables because we were literally closer together. As I moved around the room that day and introduced myself to the guests, I heard the same story over and over again. I came because I couldn't face staying home alone. I decided to attend because I needed the company. So many of those who gathered for our annual Thanksgiving feast showed up that day hoping for human connection. Otherwise alone, they took a risk. Imagine an alternative to sitting home by themselves and then chased after that vision. So yes, I realize that gathering around the table can also be fraught when we sit across from people who share a different view than our own. But when we make room for new ideas, new perspectives, we make room in our heads for the idea that these are all God's people. And we make room in our hearts for the possibility that swords might have another life as plowshares. That something painful or destructive in our own lives might yet be forged into something good. This, too, is Isaiah's vision. That once we all sit down together with hopeful joy as our host, our heated arguments and fiercely defended philosophical divides will be replaced by the very best jokes, the kind that send everybody into gales of laughter, and heart-opening stories that captivate everyone at the table so that we all lean in and even the feast is temporarily forgotten. People of God, this is my prayer for us this season, that we might make room for that kind of hope. Prepare to welcome it. Take a break from the frenzy, have a seat at your own table, or join us here at ours. Consider the possibility that God is up to something in this world that longs for healing. Look for the evidence in the eyes of those who sit across from you and in the spaces between us. and let the assurance of Christ's coming settle into your heart until it feels something like joy. May it be so. Amen.